Catherine Lawson has spent her life sacrificing for her family, believing her love would be met with gratitude. But when her daughter Sarah and son-in-law Andrew exclude her from Thanksgiving, Catherine's world shatters. Betrayed and exhausted from years of financial support, she makes a bold decision to stop enabling their lifestyle. What follows is a transformative journey, one that forces Catherine to confront the truth about her relationships and reclaim her sense of self-worth. As Catherine fights for her future, her daughter and son-in-law must face the consequences of their choices. This is a story of resilience, tough love, and the power of setting boundaries. Will Catherine's new path lead to healing, or will it cost her everything she's ever known? It's often said that family is life's greatest blessing, but sometimes it can become the source of our deepest wounds. My name is Catherine Lawson, and for 30 years, I believed the sacrifices I made for my family would eventually be rewarded with gratitude and love. I was wrong. The moment I realized the true nature of my relationship with my daughter and son-in-law wasn't when they forgot my birthday or when they asked me to babysit for the 5th weekend in a row. It was when my son-in-law Andrew looked me straight in the eye and said, "We think it would be best if you skipped Thanksgiving with us this year. Sarah's parents are hosting, and honestly, Catherine, you just don't fit in." Those words shattered something inside me. After everything I had done, after the countless nights spent caring for my daughter during her chronic illness, after draining my retirement savings to help them buy their dream home, after silently paying their car payments for 3 years, I was being told I didn't belong in my own daughter's life during the holidays. That was when I decided enough was enough. If I wasn't family enough to sit at their Thanksgiving table, then perhaps I wasn't family enough to continue paying for their car. What happened next changed everything for them, and especially for me. I never expected my life to turn out this way. At 59, I thought I'd be surrounded by family, perhaps spending my retirement years traveling and spoiling grandchildren. Instead, I found myself alone in an apartment that felt too empty, filled with memories that seemed to mock me. My journey began in Riverside, a suburb just large enough to have its own community college but small enough that everyone still knew each other's business. I started working as a teacher at Riverside Elementary right after college, and that's where I met James, my late husband. He was the school's music teacher with the most infectious laugh I'd ever heard. We married young, bought a modest townhouse on Orchard Street, and planned for a big family. Life, however, had other plans. After years of trying, we were blessed with only one child, Sarah. From the moment she was placed in my arms, I knew I would do anything for her. When she was diagnosed with severe asthma at age 5, I reduced my hours at school to care for her. Those nights spent monitoring her breathing, rushing to the emergency room at the first sign of an attack. They bonded us in a way I thought was unbreakable. James and I poured everything into giving Sarah the best life possible. We saved for her college education, driving older cars and cutting corners where we could. When she showed interest in art, we scrimped and saved to send her to summer art camps. James never got to see Sarah graduate from college. A sudden stroke took him when Sarah was just 22, leaving me a widow at 46. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses and remaining mortgage payments. I was devastated but had Sarah to think about. I couldn't fall apart. "Mom, maybe you should sell the townhouse," Sarah suggested one evening about a month after we lost James. "It's too big for just you, and the money could help with my grad school tuition." I remember feeling hurt at her words. This was our family home, filled with memories of James, but I brushed it aside. Of course, Sarah was thinking practically. She was grieving too, in her own way. "This is our home," I told her gently. "Your father and I worked hard for it. Besides, where would you stay during breaks?" "No, I'll pick up extra tutoring jobs instead." And that's exactly what I did. For the next 2 years, I worked 60-hour weeks, often taking evening tutoring sessions no one wanted. By the time Sarah graduated with her graphic design degree, I was exhausted but proud. Sarah landed a job at a design agency in Riverside, which meant she wouldn't have to move away. I was overjoyed. As she settled into her career, I continued working at the school where Principal Olivia Matthews had become the new administrator. Dr. Matthews was a childless widow who had lost her husband to heart disease years earlier. Over time, we developed a close professional relationship. She often told me I was the best teacher on staff, someone she could always count on. Then, during Sarah's second year at the company, she met Andrew Parker. He was handsome, ambitious, and came from one of the wealthiest families in the neighboring town of Glenwood. His father owned a successful chain of restaurants, and his mother was known for her elaborate charity events. From the start, I could tell they operated in different circles than we did. "Mom, I want you to meet Andrew," Sarah said when she brought him home for dinner. "He's a senior designer at work, and he's amazing." Andrew was polite but distant that evening. He glanced around our modest living room with barely concealed judgment, his eyes lingering on the outdated furniture and the family photos on the wall. "Your home is quaint," he said in a tone that made it clear he meant otherwise. "Sarah tells me you've lived here your whole married life." "Yes," I replied warmly, trying to bridge the gap I already felt forming. "James and I bought it when we were just starting out. It's nothing fancy, but it's filled with love." Andrew smiled tightly. "Well, that's what matters, isn't it? Though Sarah and I have been looking at some properties in Lakeside Gardens. Have you seen those new developments? They're absolutely gorgeous." Lakeside Gardens was the most expensive neighborhood in Riverside. The houses there started at prices I couldn't even fathom. When they announced their engagement 6 months later, I was happy for Sarah but concerned about the differences in backgrounds and expectations. Still, I embraced Andrew and tried my best to be involved in the wedding planning. "Catherine," Lisa Parker said during our first meeting to discuss the wedding, "we've already reserved the Glenwood Country Club and hired the top wedding planner in the state. We'll handle all the arrangements. You don't need to worry about a thing." I felt sidelined but reminded myself that this was about Sarah and Andrew, not me. "Is there anything I can help with?" I asked. Andrew patted my hand as if I were a child. "We know you want to contribute, Catherine. Maybe you could help with assembling the wedding favors." I swallowed my pride and nodded. After all, wasn't it a mother's job to support her child's happiness, even when it stung? After the honeymoon, Sarah and Andrew started house hunting in earnest. They invited me along one weekend to see a house in Lakeside Gardens, a sprawling colonial with 4 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a backyard that overlooked the lake. "Isn't it perfect, Mom?" Sarah asked, her eyes bright with excitement. It was beautiful, but I couldn't help wondering how they could afford it. Sarah had a good job, but she'd only been working for a few years, and I knew she still had student loans. "It's lovely," I said. "But sweetheart, are you sure it's within your budget?" Andrew's smile tightened. "My parents are helping with the down payment as a wedding gift. We've run the numbers and we can make it work." What I didn't know then was that making it work would soon involve me. About a month after they moved in, Sarah called me, her voice strained. "Mom, I hate to ask, but we're in a bit of a bind. The car payments are higher than we expected, and with the new furniture and Andrew's membership at the country club, how much do you need?" I asked without hesitation. $800 would help us get caught up," she said, sounding relieved that I hadn't questioned her further. I withdrew the money from my savings the next day. It wasn't easy. I had been putting away a little each month for a small condo I hoped to buy eventually. Something easier to maintain as I got older. But Sarah needed me, and that's what mattered. This became a pattern over the next year. Every few months, Sarah would call with another temporary financial emergency. The air conditioning system needed replacing. Andrew's company was downsizing, and he needed to invest in additional certifications. They had to replace the hardwood floors because Sarah didn't like the color. Each time, I dipped further into my savings. Each time, Sarah promised it was just until they got back on their feet. Each time, the thank you notes and calls became shorter and less frequent. Then came the biggest request of all. Sarah showed up at my house one evening alone. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with her homework, where we'd shared meals after James died, where we'd planned her future. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something serious," she began, fidgeting with her wedding ring. "Andrew and we're struggling with the car payments. The interest rate adjusted up, and with everything else." My heart sank. I already knew what was coming. "How much are you behind?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. 3 months. But it's not just that. The payment is just too high for us right now. Andrew's father had some business setbacks, so they can't help anymore. I took a deep breath. What are you asking, Sarah? If you could help with the car payments for a while, just until I get the promotion I'm up for or until Andrew finds a better position. We don't want to lose the cars, Mom. They're part of our image. The word echoed in my mind as I thought about the townhouse that James and I had worked so hard for, the home where I'd raised Sarah, which Sarah had suggested I sell after her father died. Still, I agreed. I couldn't bear the thought of my daughter and her husband losing their luxury vehicles, facing the embarrassment of repossession. I'll need to talk to Dr. Matthews about picking up more hours, I said. At 57, the evening tutoring sessions were becoming harder on my body, but I would manage. Sarah's relief was palpable. You're the best, Mom. I promise we'll pay you back once we're on solid ground again. That night, after she left, I sat alone in my kitchen and calculated what this would mean for me financially. The car payments on their luxury vehicles were nearly twice what I paid for my own modest sedan. To cover them, I would need to postpone my own retirement indefinitely and drastically cut back on my already modest expenses. But what choice did I have? She was my daughter, my only child, my last connection to James. For the next 3 years, I paid Sarah and Andrew's car payments without complaint. Each month, I transferred the money directly to their account, often skipping lunch at the school cafeteria to save a few dollars. I postponed needed repairs on my own home, let my car go without routine maintenance longer than I should have, and declined invitations from friends if they involved spending money. During this time, my relationship with Sarah and Andrew gradually shifted. The weekly Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. The phone calls grew shorter, the excuses more frequent. Andrew rarely asked about my life anymore, and when I visited their home, I couldn't help but notice how they'd redecorated lavishly while I was pinching pennies to keep them afloat. The new sectional is gorgeous, I commented during one visit, eyeing what must have been a very expensive piece of furniture. It's from that designer showroom in the city, Sarah said casually. We decided we deserve to splurge a little. Mental health is important, you know. I bit my tongue, thinking of the leaky faucet in my bathroom I couldn't afford to fix. That same evening, I overheard Andrew on the phone with his mother. I know, Mom. It's exhausting having to include her in everything, but Sarah feels obligated, you know. At least she helps out financially. My cheeks burned with humiliation. Helps out financially? I was paying their entire car payments, sacrificing my own well-being to maintain their lifestyle. And this was how he characterized my contribution. But the real turning point came the week before Thanksgiving last year. I had been battling a persistent cough for weeks, pushing through my classes despite feeling increasingly fatigued. Dr. Matthews noticed me leaning against the wall one afternoon, trying to catch my breath. That's it, Catherine, she said firmly. I'm sending you to urgent care right now. The diagnosis came back the next day, bronchitis with complications due to exhaustion and a weakened immune system. You need rest, Dr. Matthews insisted. Complete rest. I'm putting you on medical leave for at least 4 weeks. I protested, thinking of the car payment due in 2 weeks, but she was adamant. This isn't negotiable. Your health has to come first. For the first time in years, I had to think about my own needs. As I lay in my bed that evening, listening to the rain against my window, I made a decision. I would call Sarah, explain the situation, and ask if they could handle their car payments for a month or 2 while I recovered. When I phoned the next morning, Andrew answered. Catherine, he said, his voice cool. Sarah's in a meeting. Can I take a message? It's important, Andrew. I need to talk to her about the car payment. There was a pause. The car payment? What about it? I'm on medical leave, bronchitis. I won't be able to work extra shifts for a while. So I was hoping you and Sarah could cover the car payments until I'm back on my feet. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably. Andrew? Did you hear me? I heard you, he said, his voice suddenly hard. So you're saying you won't be sending the money this month? The way he phrased it, like it was an obligation, not a sacrifice I'd been making, stung deeply. I can't, Andrew. I'm ill. And the doctor says, we're counting on that money, Catherine, he cut in. We have plans. We've already booked our ski trip in Vermont over Thanksgiving break. I felt a cold wave of realization wash over me. They had money for a ski vacation but not for their own car payments. I've been covering your car payments for 3 years, I said quietly. I think you and Sarah can manage for a month while I recover from bronchitis. His laugh was short and dismissive. Right, because that makes up for everything Sarah did for you after her father died. What? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. She told me how you leaned on her completely after James died, how she had to be your emotional support when she was barely 22, how she stayed local for her first job because you couldn't handle being alone. Each word felt like a slap. That wasn't what happened at all. I had held myself together for Sarah's sake, worked extra shifts to keep her in grad school, encouraged her to follow her dreams. That's not true, Andrew. Look, we all know you've been helping with the car payments because you wanted to be involved in our lives, he said with exaggerated patience. And that's fine, but don't try to use your health as leverage. I was speechless. In what universe was paying someone's car payments considered wanting to be involved? I'll talk to Sarah tonight, I finally managed to say. Please have her call me. But Sarah didn't call that night or the next. When she finally reached out 3 days later, she sounded rushed and defensive. Mom, Andrew told me about your conversation. I'm sorry you're not feeling well, but we really need that payment. We've committed to hosting a pre-Thanksgiving dinner for Andrew's work colleagues, and we've already ordered new dining room furniture. Sarah, I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest that had nothing to do with bronchitis. I've been paying your car payments for 3 years. 3 years of extra shifts, of skipping meals, of putting off repairs on my own home. I'm asking for a short break while I recover from a serious illness. There was silence on the other end then. So you're keeping track. I thought you were helping because you wanted to, not because you expected something in return. Her words hit me like a physical blow. How had we gotten here? When had my daughter become someone who could speak to me this way? I don't expect anything in return except basic respect, I said, my voice breaking. And perhaps some concern for my health. Of course I'm concerned, she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. It's just bad timing. The holidays are coming up and we have obligations. Obligations more important than your mother's health? I asked. She sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. Let's not make this dramatic, Mom. Look, I'll see what we can do. Maybe we can send you half this month. Half? After everything, she was offering half. Don't bother, I said, a strange calm settling over me. I'll figure something out. After we hung up, I sat in my silent home, truly seeing my situation for the first time. I had given everything to a daughter who viewed my sacrifices as obligations. I had emptied my savings to maintain her lifestyle while neglecting my own needs. I had worked myself into illness for people who planned ski vacations while I couldn't afford to fix my leaky faucet. Something fundamental had to change, and it had to start with me. The next day, despite still feeling weak, I made 2 important calls. The first was to my bank to stop the automatic transfer to Sarah and Andrew's account. The second was to my old friend Nancy Thompson, a retired librarian who had been trying to get me to join her book club for years. Catherine Lawson, she said warmly when she picked up. To what do I owe this pleasure? I was wondering if that offer to join your book club is still open, I said, surprising myself with how light my voice sounded. Always. We meet on Thursdays at the library. But aren't you usually tutoring then? Not anymore, I said. I'm making some changes. As I recovered from bronchitis over the next 2 weeks, I received multiple texts and calls from Sarah, each more urgent than the last. Where was the car payment? Had I forgotten to transfer the money? Was there a problem with the bank? I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on getting well and reconsidering my priorities. I started reading books that had been sitting on my shelf for years. I invited Nancy over for tea. I even called my brother Greg in Colorado, whom I hadn't spoken to in months because I'd been too busy working extra shifts. The day before Thanksgiving, Sarah finally showed up at my door. She looked harried, her normally neat hair uncombed, her eyes shadowed with stress. "Mom," she said as soon as I opened the door, "there's been some mistake with the car payment. The bank says the transfer was cancelled." I stepped aside to let her in, noticing how she barely glanced at me, didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't comment on my still evident weight loss from being ill. "It wasn't a mistake, Sarah," I said calmly as we sat in my living room. "I cancelled the transfer intentionally." She stared at me, uncomprehending. "What? Why would you do that?" "Because I'm no longer able to pay your car payments. I'm focusing on my health and my future now." Her face flushed with anger. "You can't just decide that without warning. We have commitments based on that money." "Like your ski trip?" I asked quietly. She had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. "That's not fair. We work hard, and we deserve a vacation. And I deserve to retire someday," I replied. "I deserve to live without working myself into exhaustion. I deserve to be treated with respect by my daughter and son-in-law." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, clearly frustrated. "This isn't like you, Mom. You've always been there for me, and I always will be, emotionally," I said. "But financially, you and Andrew need to stand on your own 2 feet now." She stood up abruptly. "Fine, we'll figure it out ourselves. But don't expect us to rearrange our lives to include you when you're being this selfish." Selfish. The word hung in the air between us. "Thanksgiving is tomorrow," I said, changing the subject. "Will I see you and Andrew?" She shook her head, not meeting my eyes. "We're going to the Parkers. Andrew's mom is expecting us." "I see. And Thanksgiving?" "About that," she said, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality. "Andrew's parents are hosting at their place this year. It's going to be mostly their crowd, their family friends. Andrew thinks we both think it might be awkward for you." And there it was, after everything I had sacrificed, after years of putting their needs before my own. I wasn't even welcome at their Thanksgiving table. "Awkward," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "It's nothing personal," Sarah said, already backing toward the door. "It's just a different crowd, you know. You probably wouldn't enjoy it anyway." But it was personal. It was deeply, painfully personal. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Not really. I hope you have a lovely holiday." After she left, I stood in my doorway for a long time, watching the spot where her car had been parked. 30 years of motherhood, of putting her first. And this was where we had landed. A place where I was considered selfish for not working myself to death to pay for her lifestyle. Where I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving dinner because I didn't fit in with my own daughter's new life. That evening, I received a text from Andrew. "Sarah told me about your decision. Very disappointed. Thought you cared about our family. Guess we know where we stand now." I didn't respond. Instead, I made another decision. One that would change everything. The next morning, rather than spending Thanksgiving alone feeling sorry for myself, I drove to the community center where Nancy had organized a holiday meal for seniors who had nowhere else to go. I hadn't told her I was coming, and her face lit up when she saw me walk in. "Catherine, I didn't expect to see you today. I had a change of plans," I said simply. She didn't pry, just handed me an apron. "Well, we're glad to have you." The mashed potatoes need stirring. For the first time in years, I enjoyed a holiday meal without tension, without walking on eggshells, without carefully monitoring my words to avoid offending Andrew or his parents. The seniors at the community center were grateful for the company, the food, and the simple kindness of being remembered on a holiday. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. And with that peace came clarity about what I needed to do next. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I made an appointment with the lawyer who had helped me with James's estate years ago. Martin Goldstein's office was exactly as I remembered it, bookshelves lining the walls, the scent of coffee perpetually in the air, and a sense of calm competence that had comforted me during those dark days after losing my husband. "Catherine," Martin said warmly, rising from behind his desk to greet me. "It's been too long. How can I help you today?" I settled into the chair across from him, smoothing my skirt nervously. "I need some legal advice about a financial situation with my daughter." Martin nodded, his expression turning professional. "Tell me what's going on." I explained everything, how I'd been paying Sarah and Andrew's car payments for 3 years, the recent conflict over my illness, and their exclusion of me from the holidays. As I spoke, Martin took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, tapping his pen thoughtfully against his legal pad. Let me make sure I understand correctly. You've been making direct payments to their auto lender, but there's no formal loan agreement between you and your daughter. That's right. It was just a verbal understanding that they would pay me back someday when they were more financially stable. And approximately how much have you paid toward their car payments over these 3 years? I had calculated this number precisely the night before, $108,000. Martin's eyebrows shot up. That's a substantial sum, Catherine. And you mentioned you withdrew from your retirement savings to cover some of these payments. I nodded, feeling a flush of shame. I also picked up extra shifts at the school, but it wasn't enough. I've depleted almost all of my non-pension savings. I see. He leaned forward, his expression gentle but serious. From a legal standpoint, without a written agreement, this money could be considered a gift rather than a loan. However, we could argue that there was an implied contract based on the pattern of payments and the verbal understanding. What are my options? I asked. Well, you could sue for repayment, though that would be a lengthy and potentially expensive process. Not to mention the strain it would put on your relationship with Sarah. He paused. Or you could simply stop the payments, as you've already done, and let them handle the consequences. The thought of suing my own daughter made my stomach clench. I don't want to take legal action against Sarah. I just want to protect what I have left for my own future. Martin nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then I recommend documenting everything, every payment you've made, any text messages or emails discussing these payments, and the circumstances surrounding them. Keep this documentation in case they try to make any claims against you in the future. Do you think they would do that? I hope not, but in my experience, money can bring out the worst in people, even family. He hesitated, then added, there's one more thing to consider, Catherine. If they default on their car loans and the vehicles are repossessed, it could affect you if your name is on any of the loan documents. My heart skipped a beat. My name isn't on their car loans, but I did cosign on a personal loan they took out last year. Andrew said they needed it for home improvements. Martin's expression grew concerned. In that case, if they default on that loan, the lender could come after you for payment. How much was the loan? $35,000, I said quietly. He sighed. I strongly recommend you check the status of that account immediately. If they've drawn on that credit line, you may want to consider paying it off directly to protect your own credit and financial security. I left Martin's office with a clear action plan but a heavy heart. The reality of my financial vulnerability was sobering. I had spent years giving everything to my daughter, and now I needed to focus on protecting myself from further damage. My first stop was the bank where Sarah and Andrew had opened the personal loan. After verifying my identity as a seal signer, the bank representative pulled up the account information. The current balance on the loan is $32,740, she said, turning the screen slightly so I could see. My mouth went dry. They had used almost the entire loan amount. When was the last transaction? I asked. The representative clicked through a few screens. There was a withdrawal of $10,000 on November 10th, just before Thanksgiving, just before they booked their ski vacation, and told me I wasn't welcome for Thanksgiving. I'd like to pay off this balance and close the account, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The representative looked surprised. The entire balance? That's a significant amount. I understand. I'll be transferring the funds from my retirement account. It took nearly 2 hours to complete all the paperwork, including the early withdrawal from my retirement fund. The penalties were substantial, but Martin had made it clear that the alternative, remaining financially entangled with Sarah and Andrew, could be far more costly in the long run. As I drove home, a strange calm settled over me. I had just sacrificed almost all of my remaining retirement savings to protect myself from my own daughter's financial decisions. The pain of that reality was so profound it had circled around to numbness. At home, I found 3 missed calls from Sarah and a text message that read, "Need to discuss car payment situation ASAP. Call me." I set my phone aside without responding. I needed time to process everything before engaging with her again. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notepad, taking stock of my financial situation. After paying off the loan, I had approximately $15,000 left in accessible savings, barely enough for a year of minimal expenses if I stopped working entirely. My pension from the school would start at 65, providing a modest but dependable income. The equity in my townhouse was substantial, but I had hoped to leave that to Sarah someday. The irony wasn't lost on me. All these years, I had been saving for a future where I could help my daughter even after I was gone. Now I was facing the possibility of selling my home just to support myself in retirement. My phone rang again. "Sarah, this time," I answered. "Mom, finally," she said, sounding irritated. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I had appointments," I replied simply. "Well, we need to talk about this car payment situation. The payment was due yesterday, and we got a late notice from the bank." "Yes, I imagine you did." There was a pause, as if she was taken aback by my calm tone. "So, are you going to send the payment or not? Because if this goes on our credit report, I won't be making any more payments on your cars." "Sarah," I interrupted, "as I told you last week, I'm focusing on my own financial security now." "Mom, you can't just..." She stopped. Then her voice took on a wheedling tone I recognized from her teenage years when she wanted something expensive. "Look, I know you're upset about Thanksgiving, but that's Andrew's family's tradition. It's not like we're excluding you deliberately." "Except that is exactly what you're doing," I said quietly. "Andrew specifically told me I wouldn't fit in with the crowd at his parents' house." "He didn't mean it like that," she protested. "It's just that his family does things differently. They're more formal. More formal than the woman who raised you, who worked 60-hour weeks to put you through grad school, who has been paying your car payments for 3 years. That woman isn't formal enough to sit at a Thanksgiving table with your husband's family." The silence on the other end told me she had no good answer. "Sarah," I continued, my voice softening, "I love you. You're my daughter, and nothing will ever change that. But this relationship has become unhealthy. You and Andrew need to take responsibility for your own finances, and I need to prepare for my retirement. But the car payments are your responsibility, not mine. I've already made sacrifices you don't even know about to protect myself financially. I paid off the personal loan today." "You what?" Her voice rose in pitch. "Why would you do that?" "Because I was a CO signer, and I couldn't risk my credit being damaged if you and Andrew defaulted." "We weren't going to default. We just needed some flexibility until after the holidays." I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. "Sarah, you withdrew $10,000 from that loan 2 weeks ago. Was that for your ski vacation or the new dining room furniture?" She didn't respond immediately, and when she did, her voice was defensive. "We needed that furniture for entertaining. Andrew's boss is coming for dinner next month. It's important for his career. More important than your mother's financial security. More important than treating me with basic respect." "That's not fair," she snapped. "You're twisting everything. We appreciate what you've done, but you can't hold it over our heads forever." The phrase "what you've done" struck me as so inadequate to describe the years of sacrifice, the depletion of my savings, the toll on my health. "I'm not holding anything over your head," I said. "I'm simply stating facts. I've supported you financially well into your adulthood, and now I'm stepping back. How you handle your finances going forward is up to you." "So that's it? You're just cutting us off?" "I'm prioritizing my own needs after decades of prioritizing yours. It's called setting boundaries, Sarah." The conversation ended shortly after, with Sarah still upset but seemingly beginning to realize I wouldn't be swayed. I sat in my kitchen for a long time afterward, staring at the wall calendar where I'd circled Thanksgiving Day with a red marker months ago, anticipating spending it with my daughter and her husband. The following week, I received a call from Dr. Matthews. She was checking on my recovery but also had some news she thought might interest me. "There's an opening for an administrative position at the district office," she said. "Regular hours, no evening commitments." and it would be perfect for someone with your experience who might be looking to ease toward retirement. I was touched by her thoughtfulness. That sounds wonderful, Olivia. I think I'd like to apply. Consider it done. I've already recommended you. As I hung up, the doorbell rang. To my surprise, Lisa Parker, Andrew's mother, stood on my doorstep. Mrs. Parker, I said, unable to hide my confusion. In all the years Sarah had been married to Andrew, Lisa had barely spoken more than a few sentences to me. Mrs. Lawson, she nodded stiffly. May I come in? There's a matter we need to discuss. I stepped aside to let her enter. Noting the expensive cashmere coat and leather gloves she removed as she stepped into my modest living room. Can I offer you some tea or coffee? I asked, falling back on basic hospitality despite my wariness. No, thank you. This won't take long. She remained standing, eyeing my furniture with the same barely concealed judgment her son had shown during his first visit years ago. What can I do for you, Mrs. Parker? She clasped her hands behind her back, adopting a posture reminiscent of a principal about to discipline a student. I understand you've decided to withdraw your financial support from Sarah and Andrew's household. The way she phrased it made it sound like I was abandoning dependents rather than expecting grown adults to pay their own bills. I've decided to focus on my own financial security, I corrected gently. Sarah and Andrew are both employed adults fully capable of managing their own finances. Lisa's mouth tightened. Be that as it may, your decision has created significant hardship for them. The timing is particularly unfortunate with the holidays approaching and various social obligations to fulfill. I waited, sensing she was working her way to her actual point. Sarah is quite distressed, she continued. She tells me you've not only stopped contributing to their car payments but also paid off and closed a personal loan they were relying on. A loan for which I was legally responsible as a CO signer, I pointed out. I was protecting myself from potential liability. She waved a dismissive hand. Legally, perhaps, you were within your rights, but surely you understand the position this puts them in socially. They've committed to hosting events, made plans based on certain financial expectations that I would continue to work 60-hour weeks at age 59 to fund their lifestyle. I asked, keeping my voice level despite the indignation rising within me. Lisa had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. No one expected you to work yourself ill, Mrs. Lawson. But a more gradual transition with proper notice would have been the considerate approach. I gave notice when I was diagnosed with bronchitis, I said. I explained that I couldn't maintain the extra shifts necessary to cover their car payments. Sarah and Andrew chose to prioritize a ski vacation and new furniture over their own transportation security. She frowned. That's Sarah's version. It's the truth, I interrupted, surprising both of us with my firmness. I have the bank statements and text messages to prove it. Lisa shifted her weight, clearly unused to being challenged. Regardless of the details, the situation is causing considerable stress to my son and, by extension, my husband and myself. We're hosting Thanksgiving at our home with several prominent families attending. The last thing we need is for Sarah and Andrew to be distracted by financial worries. And there it was, the real concern. Not my daughter and son-in-law's financial stability, but how their stress might affect the Parkers' holiday entertainment. What exactly are you asking of me, Mrs. Parker? I said, though I already knew the answer. I'm suggesting a compromise, she said, her tone becoming more businesslike. If you could resume the car payments temporarily, just until after the new year, it would give them time to make arrangements. Perhaps downsize, as you suggested to Sarah. And why would I do that when I've already made it clear I need to prioritize my own financial security? Lisa reached inside her coat and withdrew a checkbook. I'm prepared to offer you compensation for this inconvenience. The implied insult that my financial decisions were merely an inconvenience to their social calendar was breathtaking in its callousness. You want to pay me to resume paying my daughter's car payments? I clarified, wanting to be absolutely certain I understood this stunning proposition. Think of it as a consulting fee, she said smoothly, uncapping an expensive-looking pen. You temporarily resume the payments, allowing them to maintain appearances through the holiday season. and I compensate you for your trouble. Simple business arrangement. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. This woman, this wealthy, privileged woman who had never once invited me to her home despite years of family connection, was standing in my living room offering to essentially bribe me to continue enabling my daughter's financial dependence. Mrs. Parker, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm, I'm not interested in being paid to support my own daughter. If you're concerned about Sarah and Andrew's financial situation, perhaps you should offer to help them directly. She looked genuinely surprised, as if the concept of directly supporting her own son had never occurred to her. That's not how we do things in our family. We believe in financial independence. The irony was so rich I almost laughed. Financial independence facilitated by a 59-year-old teacher working overtime to pay bills for two healthy adults in their 30s. Her face hardened. I see. Sarah was right about your attitude. This is precisely why we felt it would be awkward to include you in our Thanksgiving gathering, because I expect adults to pay their own bills. Because you clearly harbor resentment toward my daughter and her lifestyle choices. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper would accomplish nothing. Mrs. Parker, I don't resent Sarah or her choices. I simply can no longer subsidize them at the expense of my own health and financial security. She replaced her checkbook in her pocket with a sharp motion. Very well. I can see this conversation isn't going to be productive. I'll tell Sarah and Andrew they'll need to make other arrangements. That would be best, I agreed. As she moved toward the door, she paused, turning back with a calculating expression. You know, Catherine, may I call you Catherine? Many parents would be grateful that their child had married into a family of our standing. The connections alone are invaluable. I met her gaze steadily. Many parents would expect their daughter-in-law's family to treat them with basic courtesy and respect regardless of standing. Her lips thinned, but she offered no response as she donned her coat and gloves. Happy Thanksgiving, Mrs. Parker, I said as I opened the door for her. She nodded stiffly and left without returning the sentiment. After closing the door, I leaned against it, my heart racing as if I'd run a marathon. The entire interaction had been surreal, from Lisa Parker's unexpected appearance on my doorstep to her brazen attempt to buy my continued financial support of Sarah and Andrew. More disturbing was the realization that this was how they all viewed me, as a resource to be utilized. An inconvenience when I failed to fulfill my designated role, a social embarrassment to be managed and excluded, not as a person with my own needs, feelings, and dignity. I moved to my kitchen and put the kettle on, needing the comfort of a hot cup of tea. As I waited for the water to boil, I glanced at the calendar again. At that circled Thanksgiving Day that now loomed as a day of solitude rather than family connection. For a moment, I felt a wave of doubt. Had I done the right thing? Should I have found a way to compromise to ease Sarah and Andrew into financial independence more gradually? Was I punishing them for excluding me from Thanksgiving by withdrawing financial support? The kettle whistled, interrupting my spiral of self-doubt. As I prepared my tea, I reminded myself of the facts. I had worked myself into bronchitis trying to support my daughter's lifestyle. I had depleted my savings and put my own retirement at risk. I had been explicitly told I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving dinner because I wouldn't fit in with the Parkers' social circle. No, I wasn't punishing Sarah and Andrew. I was finally recognizing that I deserved better treatment than I had been receiving. I was establishing boundaries that should have been in place years ago. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed Sarah's number. I hesitated, then answered. Mom, she began without preamble, her voice tight with anger. Did you just refuse money from Lisa Parker? So Lisa had wasted no time reporting our conversation. I refused to be paid to resume paying your car payments. Yes, do you have any idea how humiliating that was for us? For Andrew's mother to have to come to you like that? I closed my eyes, absorbing the fact that my daughter saw her mother-in-law attempting to bribe me as somehow humiliating for them. Not for me. Sarah, I said quietly, if you're embarrassed, it should be by the fact that your mother-in-law felt she needed to intervene in your financial affairs. not by my refusal to accept payment for continuing to support you. She was trying to help, Sarah protested. And you threw it back in her face. Do you have any idea what that's going to do to my relationship with her parents? They're furious. They're furious that I won't continue to work myself ill to pay your bills. That seems like misplaced anger, don't you think? This isn't just about money anymore, she said, her voice shaking. This is about you deliberately trying to ruin our holidays, our standing with Andrew's family, everything. The accusation stung all the more because I could hear in her voice that she genuinely believed it. In her mind, my decision to prioritize my own well-being was a deliberate attack on her and Andrew. Sarah, I love you, I said, choosing my words carefully, but I think you need to take a step back and consider how you would feel if our situations were reversed. If I expected you to work extra hours to pay my bills, then excluded you from family gatherings because you wouldn't fit in. That's different, she muttered. Parents are supposed to help their children. Adult children are supposed to become independent, I countered gently, and to treat their parents with respect and gratitude, not as ATMs they can access whenever they want. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, with a coldness I'd never heard from her before, Sarah said, "You know what? Fine, keep your money. Stay home alone for Thanksgiving. I hope it's worth it." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat at my kitchen table, the tea cooling in front of me, and let the tears come, not just for the immediate pain of Sarah's anger and rejection, but for all the years I'd spent believing that my sacrifices would someday be recognized and appreciated, for the gradual erosion of our relationship as Sarah and Andrew became more focused on appearances and status than on genuine connection, for the mother I'd been who had failed to teach her daughter the value of gratitude and respect. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes but a clear mind. I couldn't control Sarah and Andrew's reactions or choices. I could only control my own. I called Nancy and asked if the offer to join her family for Thanksgiving dinner was still open. "Of course," she exclaimed. "We'd love to have you. And don't worry about bringing anything fancy, just your wonderful self." Then I called Dr. Matthews' office to confirm I would take the administrative position at the district office. Her secretary sounded pleased. "Dr. Matthews will be delighted. She specifically asked me to make sure you were coming for the interview." Finally, I called my brother Greg in Colorado. We hadn't been close in recent years, partly due to distance and partly due to the time constraints of my work schedule. "Catherine," he said warmly when he answered. "What a lovely surprise." We talked for nearly an hour, catching up on each other's lives. When I told him in broad strokes about the situation with Sarah and Andrew, he was supportive without being judgmental. "It sounds like you're finally taking care of yourself," he said. "It's about time, if you ask me. You've always been the one to give until there's nothing left." "I just never thought it would come to this," I admitted. Being excluded from Thanksgiving, having my daughter angry at me for not paying her bills. Sometimes the hardest part of being a parent is letting our children face the consequences of their own choices, Greg said wisely. "You taught Sarah how to walk by eventually letting go of her hands, right? This is just the adult version of that." His perspective was comforting, a reminder that stepping back wasn't abandonment but rather a necessary part of parenting an adult child. "You know," Greg added before we hung up, "I was planning to visit Aunt Martha in Chicago after New Year's. That's not too far from you. Maybe I could extend my trip and spend a few days with you." The prospect of seeing my brother, of reconnecting with family who valued my company, lifted my spirits considerably. "I'd love that," I said sincerely. As Thanksgiving morning dawned, I prepared to head to Nancy's house, but just as I was about to leave, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I was shocked to find Andrew standing there, looking disheveled and anxious. "Andrew," I said, unable to hide my surprise, "I wasn't expecting you." "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice strained. "Alone. It's important." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. "I was just on my way out, but I can spare a few minutes." He paced in my living room, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of obvious distress. "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Sarah doesn't know I'm here." "Okay," I said cautiously. He took a deep breath. Catherine, the money you've been giving us for the car payments, it hasn't all been going to the cars. I felt a chill. What do you mean? Where has it been going? Andrew couldn't meet my eyes. I've been gambling, online mostly, some sports betting. It started small, just for fun, but it got out of control. I sank into a chair, stunned. Gambling, all this time? He nodded miserably. The cars were paid off over a year ago. I've been using the money you sent to cover losses, to place new bets, to try to win back what I'd lost. The room seemed to tilt slightly as I tried to process this revelation. Does Sarah know? No, he said quickly. She thinks we're still paying off the cars. I've been hiding it from her too. I thought back to all the desperate requests for money, the temporary financial emergencies, the urgent need for funds that couldn't wait, and the personal loan. I asked, already knowing the answer. Most of it went to gambling debts, he admitted, his voice barely audible. Not home improvements like I told Sarah. I felt sick, so I've been working extra shifts, depleting my retirement savings to fund your gambling addiction. He flinched at the word addiction but didn't deny it. I didn't mean for it to happen. I kept thinking I could fix it, that the next bet would turn things around. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Andrew sank onto my couch, looking utterly defeated. Because it's all falling apart. The credit cards are maxed out. The bank is threatening to repossess the cars that we supposedly paid off. Sarah is starting to ask questions about where the money is going. He looked up at me, his eyes desperate. I know I have no right to ask, but I need help. Not money, he added quickly when he saw my expression harden. I need help stopping. I can't do this anymore. I sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing everything. The anger I expected to feel was tempered by a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about Sarah's entitlement or the Parkers' social aspirations. There was a deeper, darker problem at the core of everything. Does anyone else know? I finally asked. He shook his head. My parents would disown me. My father. Gambling ruined his own father's business. It's the one thing he has zero tolerance for. Suddenly, so many things made sense: the desperate need to maintain appearances, the elaborate social events beyond their means, the frantic reaction when I stopped the payments. Andrew, I said carefully, you need professional help. This isn't something you can handle on your own, and it's not something I can fix for you either. I know, he whispered. I've looked up some programs, but I'm scared. What if Sarah leaves me? What if my parents find out? Those are possibilities you'll have to face, I said honestly. But continuing on this path guarantees those outcomes eventually, plus financial ruin. He nodded, wiping at his eyes. What should I do? First, you need to tell Sarah the truth. All of it. Then you need to get into a treatment program immediately. Gamblers Anonymous is free, and there are counselors who specialize in addiction. Will you be there when I tell her? He asked, vulnerability evident in his voice. I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but not because I'm taking your side. Because Sarah will need support too. Relief washed over his face. Thank you, Catherine. I know I don't deserve your help after everything, after how we've treated you. This isn't about what you deserve, I said. It's about doing what's right for everyone involved, including myself. As he left, promising to bring Sarah over that evening to have the difficult conversation, I called Nancy to explain why I'd be missing Thanksgiving dinner. With characteristic warmth, she insisted she would simply bring dinner to us instead. No one should be alone on a day like this, she declared, especially not when facing such a difficult situation. By the time Sarah and Andrew arrived that evening, I had prepared myself mentally for what was to come. The revelation of Andrew's gambling addiction, Sarah's reaction to the betrayal, the difficult path forward for all of us. What I hadn't prepared for was the sense of purpose that now filled me. For years, I had defined myself by what I gave to Sarah: my time, my money, my emotional support. Now, faced with this crisis, I was discovering a new role, not just as a mother who sacrificed, but as a mother who guided, who set boundaries, who helped without enabling. It wasn't the Thanksgiving I had expected, but as Nancy arrived with containers of turkey and stuffing, as Sarah broke down in tears at Andrew's confession, as we all sat together in my small living room navigating the painful truth, I felt a strange sense of gratitude, not for the circumstances, certainly, but for the opportunity to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of honesty rather than expectation, of genuine care rather than financial dependence. As I stand in my kitchen preparing for this year's Thanksgiving, I can hardly believe how much has changed in 12 months. Sarah and Andrew are arriving soon. Their marriage survived the gambling revelation, though not without significant struggle. Andrew has been in recovery for a year now, attending weekly meetings and working with a therapist who specializes in addiction. Sarah found her own counselor to work through the betrayal and her part in their financial dysfunction. They sold their house in Lakeside Gardens and moved to a modest apartment they can actually afford. Sarah took a promotion that required longer hours but offered better pay. And Andrew found a job at a smaller design firm, one that doesn't require the social networking and status symbols that had been so important to him before. The Parkers eventually came around, though it took time. Lisa's initial reaction to Andrew's gambling was exactly as he'd feared: outrage, threats of disowning him, declarations that he had humiliated the family. But Thomas Parker, surprisingly, had a change of heart after seeing his son's commitment to recovery. It turned out his own father's gambling had affected him more deeply than anyone knew. And watching Andrew fight the same demons stirred something in him. As for me, I've settled into my administrative role at the district office. The regular hours and reduced stress have done wonders for my health. I've been dating Dr. Alan Peterson, the district superintendent, for 6 months now, a development that surprised no one more than me. Nancy and I still attend book club every Thursday. My brother Greg visited as promised and has made 2 more trips since then. I've started a small savings account again, slowly rebuilding what was lost. The doorbell rings, and I wipe my hands on a dish towel before going to answer it. Sarah stands there, a pumpkin pie in her hands. Andrew beside her carrying a bottle of sparkling cider. Part of his commitment to sobriety is avoiding alcohol. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom, Sarah says, her eyes meeting mine with a warmth that was missing for so long. Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart, I reply, stepping back to welcome them in. Come on in. Nancy and Alan should be here soon. As we move to the kitchen, Sarah sets down the pie and turns to face me. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about last Thanksgiving, about everything that happened. I nod, giving her space to continue. I don't think I ever properly apologized for how I treated you, for taking your help for granted, for excluding you from our lives except when we needed money. Sarah, I begin, but she shakes her head. No, please, I need to say this. I was so caught up in appearances, in trying to be someone I thought Andrew's family would approve of, that I forgot who I really was and where I came from. She takes my hand. I forgot to be grateful for the mother who always put me first, who worked extra shifts to give me opportunities, who loved me unconditionally. I did put you first, I acknowledge, for a very long time. Maybe too long, in ways that weren't healthy for either of us. She smiles ruefully. I'm learning that in therapy, how we created this unhealthy dynamic together. How I moved from appropriate dependence as a child to inappropriate dependence as an adult. We're both learning, I say, squeezing her hand, and that's what matters. The doorbell rings again and Andrew goes to answer it. Nancy's voice fills the hallway, followed by Alan's deeper tones. Soon my small dining room will be crowded with people sharing a meal, sharing stories, sharing genuine connection. It's not the family gathering I had envisioned all those years ago when Sarah was small. It's something different, something that's been tested by fire and emerged stronger. A family redefined not by obligation or expectation but by choice and respect. As I bring the turkey to the table, I catch Sarah watching me with a mixture of love and newfound understanding in her eyes. We have both learned difficult lessons about boundaries, about healthy love, about what it means to truly support someone versus enabling destructive patterns. Thank you, she mouths silently across the table. I smile back, feeling a sense of peace that has nothing to do with perfect holiday gatherings and everything to do with living authentically. The greatest gift I gave myself wasn't financial freedom or even the new relationships that now enrich my life. It was the knowledge that I am worthy of respect from my daughter, from my son-in-law, from the world at large, and most importantly, from myself.